Working on my 2002 Ford Excursion 7.3 liter Power Stroke turbo diesel. I started noticing that while going up hills, putting a load on the engine, I was actually losing speed, losing power, and this was only on hills. On flat level ground, it seemed to operate normally. But as soon as I got into any type of hill where I was putting a load on the engine, I was losing power and throwing a code P1211. Now, that is typically associated with the injection control pressure sensor, an ICP, or also an injection pressure regulator, which is both of them up on the engine in the engine bay. So I was kind of stumped by that, and originally when this happened, I replaced those and took it for a drive, and it didn't change a thing. So at that point I began to suspect that there was something else going on, even though the code was saying it was a sensor or regulator problem. So I started looking at fuel, and I wanted to check and make sure that this fuel pump here, which is mounted underneath the frame, underneath the driver's seat area, was making some noise. I hadn't noticed it before, but when I stopped on the side of the road and keyed on and listened to it run without starting the engine, it was making a high-pitched whining noise, and it was kind of oscillating, you know, up and down. It wasn't consistent. Real strange, kind of loud too, and I'd never heard that before. So before all this happened, it never really made any noise at all. So what I did was I wanted to check and see that it was functioning normally. So what you have to do is, there's a little clip here that inserts in. This is the fuel line that goes up to the fuel filter bowl up on top of the engine, and you need this tool right here. This is the smallest one in my set. There's the set right there. It's for air conditioning or any type of line you got to break with an internal spring, and you just snap it over the line. You push forward on it while pulling this line away, and that breaks the line. Now this is under pressure, this line. It says so right on the side of this fuel pump here. So if you break that while it's under pressure, fuel will spray everywhere. So what I did was I went up on top, and there's a drain for the fuel bowl. It's a yellow lever. You can drain if you get a water in fuel sensor or light on your dash, or if you're changing the fuel filter, you can drain the bowl by opening up that yellow lever and letting the fuel drain down out onto the ground. So what I did was I went up there and I released the pressure out of the system, and then I was able to break this line, and just some residual fluid ran out of it, but no spraying or anything. And then what I've done is I've attached a 1/4 inch fuel line onto that, and there's the line up here. This is coming from my fuel tank. So what I was going to do was I was going to put a container under here, and here's my container. I cleaned it out. It had some windshield washer fluid in it, but I've cleaned it out, rinsed it out with diesel and everything, so it's nice and clean. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this under here, and I'm going to key on the ignition. Now this, once you key on the ignition but don't start the engine, this will run for about 10 to 15 seconds, and then it will shut off. And I'm going to see how much fuel and with what force that fuel comes out when I key that on. Okay, so I've got some assistance inside the vehicle. I'm going to place this clean container on the outlet side of the fuel pump and have it keyed on to see what we're doing for fuel flow. Key on. Key off. Let that drain. Okay, that doesn't seem to be a lot of fuel. I'm going to mark that right there. And now we're going to check it another way. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken the fuel line coming from the tank off the back of the fuel pump, and I put on a section of 1/4 inch fuel line, and I've got it going down to a clean container full of fresh diesel fuel, and that's going to represent the fuel tank now without a restriction. So we'll see what we get when we bypass the fuel tank and come straight out of a container. Okay, key on. Key off. Okay, so easily twice as much fuel, and there was looked like a little bit more pressure too. So that tells me that there is a restriction in the fuel tank. So we're going to have to drop the tank. Now this is Ford Excursion, a 7.3 liter Power Stroke only tank removal, 44-gallon tank in the rear. So you'll only encounter this on an Excursion. If you have an F-Series, you're going to maybe have a rear tank and a side tank, but the rear tank's not going to be nearly this big. And it's heavy and it's awkward. Got this big heavy skid plate on it, and there's about 25 gallons of fuel in there. So because I have access to one, I'm using my tractor with forks on it to lower it out of there. A regular forklift will work. Otherwise you'd have to drain the fuel tank, and it takes every bit of 2 grown men to muscle this thing down out of there. There's the 4 bolts I was showing you earlier. There's 2 in the back. They're 18 millimeter, or these are actually the back ones. The other ones were the front ones. The first thing you've got to do is loosen the clamps on the inlet fill and the vent tube over here. Then you've got a sending unit wiring harness. Hello. Thank you. Get you unplug from down here. And the next thing I'm going to do is disconnect the line going to the fuel pump and the return line going to the tank. I believe you just press on these and pull them off. So that's what I'm going to do next. Then I can lower the tank completely out of here and pull the sending unit. Okay, so it is out of the vehicle, and now I have access to undo this locking ring counterclockwise, right hand thread, and then I can pull the sending unit out and look for the obstruction. This thing's pretty dirty, and so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug off everything, return line, fuel sending line. I'm going to plug up those tubes, and I'm going to pressure wash this thing since I've got it down and get it real clean. It's 216,000 miles of road dirt and grime and a little bit of fuel I spilled when I disconnected those lines. So this is the retaining ring that holds the sending unit in, and it has these ribs on it that you'll need to knock on. I use this pry bar and tap on it with a hammer. You want to make sure it's going to be tight, and you want to get it back on tight. It comes off counterclockwise, and there is an arrow right here and you need to line that back up again. There's a little tab inside there. If you don't get that seated properly and you put that ring down on it, and it may appear to be tight, but then as the fuel sauces around, it'll leak out the top, so you've got to get that orientation right. So I've already loosened this a little bit, about half a turn. And then usually at some point, you can start turning it by hand. It's not easy. And then you take that off. Now pulling the sending unit out. There's a gasket here. I want to be aware of that. Pull it out. You don't want to bend the arm on the fluid level sensor. There it is. This floats up and down. This is what tells the gauge how much fuel is in the tank. This is the pickup screen. It does have some debris in it. You can clean that. I'll take that out and clean that. That's not what we're after though. What we're after is right inside here. Show you how to get to those next. To get this pickup screen out, this really is to catch larger debris. You can just put a screwdriver in there, pry it out, and you're just going to clean all this debris off. This really isn't bad. I've seen much worse. So that's easy to get out right there. And then to get to the actual strainers, is what they call them, or Ford part number 4Z-9365-BA fuel filter element. You get one per package, so you got to order 2 of these. And this is what they look like when they're new. You put a screwdriver just in here. You don't want to break this. You have to buy a new sending unit. You just pop that like that. Turn it over. Screwdriver in here. Just be gentle with it so you don't break the plastic. Okay. And here's what we're after right here. This is the problem that will cause you to lose power. There's the new one. There's the one I just pulled out. Here's the other one. Those are pretty bad. So I'm just gonna clean up this area where they go onto here, get some of this dirt off and everything. And then you just put the new ones on. Slip it inside here, it'll snap. It's got 1 slot there, 2 slots over here that'll snap together. And then you're ready to clean this screen and put it back into the fuel tank. Okay, so I've cleaned out the pickup screen. This is just to catch large stuff, but I have seen these completely plugged with algae and sludge. And also, be aware if you're running out of fuel like at 1/4 of a tank, when your gauge still says you have about 1/4 of a tank, these fall apart right in here. They'll break down over time and crack and break and fall off. Even though they'll break up as far as here where this little hose clamp is. And then when you get to about 1/4 of a tank, you just suck air. So you need to replace this. I'll put a part number at the bottom of the video. So I've got this all cleaned out now. So you just put your new filters back on. Slide them in there. There's an O-ring right here. This does the sealing. And you just want to snap it. Make sure they both snap. Like that. And now you're ready to put this back into the fuel tank. Okay, so when you get ready to put this sending unit pickup tube back into the fuel tank, there are 2 tabs on the top of it, and they got to align with the 2 notches right here. It'll only go one way, but you got to make sure they set down in there so that this ring seals. Put the float in, sending unit, and if you're off a little bit and you turn it, you'll see that right there. Now I can't turn that. It's locked into those two tabs. So you put your wiring harness through your retaining ring and start threading it on. And just check every once in a while, make sure that that's still sitting on those two tabs. And just turn this, and then after a little bit it's going to get tight, and you're going to have to use a hammer and a little drift to tap it around and get it good and tight. Okay, so I've got the sending unit back in. It's nice and tightened down. The arrow's back where it was, nice and solid. I'm putting some dielectric grease in this sending unit wiring harness that we'll plug up later. So all you have to do now is get the tank back up in, hook this up, hook up your fuel line to the pump, your return line, and then of course you're going to hook up your fill hose and your vent line, and tighten up the 4 bolts. You'll be good to go. Okay, fuel tank's back in, everything's tightened down, hooked up, and if you don't have a forklift or a tractor with forks on it or some way to support this, this is definitely not a one-man job. This is a 2 grown men job at the very least, and even then you would have to empty the contents of the tank, which I didn't want to do because it was over half full. So while I was doing this, I installed a new fuel pump. It's the Bosch OEM fuel pump. And the reason I did that was I called O'Reilly when I started first having trouble to see if they had a fuel pump, not knowing what the problem might be. So I was checking all the angles to see if my local dealer had, or O'Reilly Auto Parts store had, the items that I might need to fix this fuel starvation problem. And they said they had the fuel pump with a lifetime warranty, but to get that lifetime warranty from O'Reilly, you have to buy those filters that go in the tank, because they know that when those get plugged up, it puts a strain on the pump itself. It's trying to suck fuel through this crap. And so the only way they'll honor that lifetime warranty is if you buy 2 of these, and you have to keep that receipt from O'Reilly showing that you bought these. I have no idea how they keep you honest about putting them in, but the thing is that if you've got this problem and you put a new fuel pump on there and these are still in the tank, you're not going to get down the road any further until you drop the tank and replace these. Now, I get diesel is a dirty fuel. It's just nasty, especially in the United States. We just have real low standards on diesel fuel. And here's evidence of it. I mean, where did all this crap come from? This is just pumped out of the pump. I believe they use 30 micron pumps at most diesel pumps, so it's somewhat filtered, but 30 microns isn't that clean. I'd rather see 10 or less, personally. So I get that Ford put these in to keep this stuff from getting into the fuel pump, but what I don't understand is, just like putting the pumps in the fuel tanks, I don't get it. The only thing that should be in the fuel tank is the pickup tube, the screen on the end of it, so it picks up fuel off the very bottom. Like I showed earlier in the video, that's got a coarse screen on it that gets plugged up with stuff sometimes. But there shouldn't be anything else in there. There shouldn't be any other filters. There shouldn't be any reason to pull that unless the sending unit's not working. Or that foot rots and comes off and you're running out at a quarter tank, which is another problem with this Ford design. But why couldn't you take this filter, which is a good idea, and mount it somewhere up in the frame rail before the fuel filters, so you're doing the same exact thing. You're straining and filtering the contents coming out of the tank before it goes into this fuel pump and damages it, and maybe goes on further and clogs up the primary filter up on top of the engine. Why put it in the tank? I just don't understand it. So if this happens to me again, I am going to come up with something. I'm going to get some sort of inline filter, something that I can change out, and I'm going to eliminate this crap from my vehicle that's down in the tank. I've seen some videos on how you can eliminate this whole thing and just suck right off the bottom. But then you've got to filter before your fuel pump, or you're going to have problems there. So I hope this video has helped people. This particular one was an Excursion, but it doesn't matter if you have an F250, F350. I think got back to 95, 94, 95 forward. They all have these in the tank. And so this video, this part of this video would apply to you. It's just that I have the 44-gallon big monster tank in back. And if you have an F250, even if you've got dual tanks, the pickup is the same. The sending unit, all that stuff that I pulled out of my tank, it's identical from tank to tank. So this would apply to you, and I hope it helps. Thanks.